I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 220 of Humanity Rising. Each day over the last week, we've been following the trial of Derek Chauvin, and I've been giving a very brief report each day. Yesterday, the chief of police of Minneapolis testified that what Derek Chauvin did was absolutely unnecessary, and the man that pronounced Derek Chauvin dead testified that it was due to asphyxiation, due to a cutting off of the oxygen, which is what happened when Derek Chauvin's knee stayed on George Floyd's neck for that 9 minutes and 24 seconds. This has been a very important breakthrough for America and for the world. This is the first time in a case of police officers killing Black men that there's been a break in what they call the blue shield. Normally the police rally around their own, and in virtually every other case, the police officer either goes completely free or has a minimal probationary period, sometimes is terminated, but never held to the full extent of the law. So what's happening now in Minneapolis, Minnesota, as the blue shield breaks down and the full extent of a murder is revealed to the world thanks to the video of a 17-year-old girl that happened to pass by on her way to the store to get a snack with her 13-year-old sister. That video has revealed the truth about what actually happened. And it's going to be a very interesting rollout now of how the defense of Derek Chauvin, well-funded by the alt-right in the United States, is going to challenge the facts at hand. And it's just important for all of us at Humanity Rising that we take in an ongoing way the gravity of the pandemic, and also the gravity of the one iconic moment that defined 2020. And that was the death of George Floyd, in an iconic moment that ricocheted around the world and has stayed with us. As we ponder these matters, there's probably no archetype available to us than the archetype of the sage. We need wisdom now. We need the capacity of the sage to understand the complexity of the moment in which we find ourselves, to discern the pathway of the wise one as we traverse a world that is careening out of control, at the center of which is runaway climate change. And the archetype of the sage has been with humanity for a very long time. One thinks of ancient China in the person of Confucius, the person of Lao Tzu, who wrote the Tao Te Ching. One thinks of Socrates in the West, the initial archetypal expression of the sage, the first one who was actually called a sage in ancient Greece. And how wise people have guided humanity. One thinks of the shaman and the indigenous tribes, the elders, We're going to explore that archetype today. And we're going to be discussing that while in antiquity, the sage was the wise elder, today there are very old souls and very young bodies, and that the sage archetype, the archetype of the wise person, is being embraced in a transgenerational way, right at the moment when we need it so urgently, to both inform us of what's true in a world of false news, but also to guide us on the pathway with many conflicting forces and many beckoning calls from the consumer society and the authoritarian society and those that would seduce us into falsehoods and the big lie. Wisdom is a rare commodity, but accessible to everyone. To convene our session today, I want to introduce Marilyn Loy Every. She's an alumni of Ubiquity University and our Wisdom School. She did a Doctor of Ministry degree some 15 years ago on the question of aging. I remember Marilyn very, very well during that time. It was right at the beginning of my tenure as president of the university. She was just founding Sage Essence. She has several master's degree in psychology and audiology. She's written a number of books, starting with Fire in the Well on aging. And she's now the co-chair of Saging International and has brought together this panel in a very, very deep and heartful way. So Marilyn, welcome to our program. We badly need, urgently need illuminations on wisdom. Welcome.
Thank you, Jim, for this gracious welcome. And I extend a special welcome to each of you here today, joining us to explore the emergence of the Sage archetype, sages transforming the world. I am pleased to introduce my co-facilitators and treasured cohorts as well. And first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Katya Peterson from Sonoma, California. She is partner, co-chair with me with Saging International, and also coordinator of e-courses in partnership with Spirituality and Practice. Katya is the president of Peterson Argo Incorporated, a transformational education company. And she brings decades of experience as a clinical psychotherapist, an educator, and also an author. Her experiential work is designed to shift perspectives on life and create new possibilities while reigniting a sense of purpose and meaning. Katya's passion resides in holding hospitable spaces for individuals and groups to recognize their strengths and increase their capacity to create positive change. Our third facilitator today is Dr. Randy Morris from Whidbey Island, another Washington State compadre. And Randy is a member of our executive circle and ritual team at Saging International. After Randy taught for 3 years at the Hiroshima International School in Japan, he then was professor for 30 years at Antioch University, Seattle. He also serves as president emeritus for the board of Rite of Passage Journeys. And this is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to restoring rites of passage for youth, for adults and elders, where he has led vision quests for many years. As a certified saging leader also, Randy facilitates classes and workshops on topics related to saging and conscious eldering. Additional interests that Randy has include dreams, myths, ritual process, and eco-spirituality. Also, an important Saging International attendee today is Judy Steyert from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And Judy has been a certified Saging leader with Saging International since 2004. And since that time, she has facilitated numerous courses integrating the basic concepts of the program with elder wisdom in movies. And currently, Judy serves as a Zoom host for many of the workshops sponsored by Saging International. So welcome, Katya and Randy, and thank you, Judy. And it is truly an honor for all of us to be with you today. And it's particularly special for me to be in the company of other Ubiquity students and friends. So our attention today is to inspire interest in the emergence specifically of the Sage archetype and its potential for your life. You no doubt have seen, whether you've recognized it or not, that it has been critically important during this COVID pandemic, and its essential presence is what we have relied on and moving forward with hopes for a flourishing future. We also intend to stimulate our individual and collective imaginations and to inspire a sense of hope. We're going to take a brief journey back to the past where the Sage archetype seems to have resided in quiet ground of the collective unconscious. In conversation with Katya, we will then bridge a deeper understanding of the necessity of the Sage archetype as we navigate these particular uncertain times that we're in right now with intergenerational collaboration and envisioning a thriving future. Then Randy will lead us imagining a sustainable future and activating global transformation from an archetypal Sage perspective. So initially here, I want to invite you to participate in a brief exercise. I would like to have every single person that's attending today, every single one of you, please place your age in the chat box. At Saging International, we call this our years of life experience. So go ahead and populate the chat box with the number of your age, also known as your years of life experience. So we're going to return to this later. So just upload that request, your answer to that request. So I now invite Randy Morris to open our time together with a heart ritual. Randy?
Yes, thanks, Marilyn. I appreciate that. So I'd like to invite all of us into a group heart meditation that will bring everyone on the call into the same heart space. As one of my dear mentors, Robert Sardello, taught me, there are special properties within the realm of the heart. For instance, the near and the far are measured in terms of love. What you love is near, and what you don't care for is far away. Furthermore, when in a heart space, linear time is relativized. There is only the now. And finally, the interiority of the heart is a profoundly moral sphere. Lies cannot survive in the realm of the heart. It's a place where the good, the true, the beautiful, and the just thrive. I offer this meditation to draw all of us together inside the chambers of each other's hearts, which is also the earth's spiritual heart, where resides the anima mundi, the soul of the world. By gathering in this way, we serve the formation of a beloved earth community. So let's begin by getting comfortable in your chair, closing your eyes or using a soft gaze, and imagine, if you will, a clear sphere about the size of a BB held between your thumb and finger. And there it is, a beautiful shiny orb held by your fingers. And then, in a conscious act of imagination, bring that clear sphere to the brow spot of your third eye and insert it there. Using the light of your interior imagination, observe the clear sphere from all angles. Notice its spherical perfection and its sparkling luminosity. When your imagination has made of this orb a permanent object that doesn't easily fade, in a conscious act of will, drop that clear sphere down into the chamber of your spiritual heart. Now, unlike your physical heart, your spiritual heart is a single chamber of vast dimensions. Hovering in the middle of it now is your clear sphere the size of a BB. If you lose track of this clear sphere during the meditation, just conjure it back into place with a simple act of imagination. Now I invite you to use your imagination to allow the size of that clear sphere to slowly expand equally in all directions. Observe how it gently enlarges. And as it does, notice how the center of that sphere always remains in the center of your spiritual heart. Allow the circumference of the sphere to expand a bit more until it surrounds your physical heart. Your physical heart is now inside your spiritual heart. Let's keep going. Allow the outer edges of the sphere to expand further until it encompasses your whole body. Now your body is inside your spiritual heart. And let's just keep going. Using the power of your imagination, allow the outer edges of your sphere to expand in all directions until it encompasses the room in which you are residing, the neighborhood around you, the landscape of country or city in which you live. Notice as the outer part of the sphere expands, the center always remains in the center of your spiritual heart. You may get the feeling that as your sphere enlarges, you're about to encounter a sphere being propagated by someone else in this class. Invite them into your heart. Expand further. It may seem like the eyes at the edge of your sphere are seen from high above the land as the sphere expands its way across the countryside, sweeping past rivers, mountains, oceans, and plains. When the edge of your sphere encompasses a part of the earth in which a loved one resides, notice that you can visit that person instantaneously because of your love for them and the power of the imagination. That's because in the realm of the heart, the near and the far is measured by love. Ever larger the sphere expands until you have now encompassed the whole earth. At the edge of your sphere, your awareness is now looking back at the beautiful blue-green orb of Mother Earth. You may be able to see to your left and your right the presence of everyone on this call. We are now all in each other's hearts. And because we are of the earth, expressions of her very being, we're also inside the heart of the earth. We are in the midst of the anima mundi, the soul of the world, holding the earth and each other in the chambers of our spiritual hearts, while simultaneously being held by the earth in her spiritual heart. We have formed a conscious web of love for the planet, allowing us to further manifest the destiny of the planet Earth, which is to become a planet of love. I leave you now in this place for the duration of our time together, a sacred space that is simultaneously in the center of your heart and which encompasses the entire world. May all that transpires in this time together as we reflect upon the archetype of the sage be in service to the creation of a beloved earth community.
Randy, thank you for bringing us together in this powerful and heartfelt way. Dr. Carol Pearson, a world-renowned expert on depth psychology, is among many who have contributed to the study of archetypes. I particularly have been attracted to the inspiring title of one of her books, which is Awakening the Heroes Within. Of course, our focus today is relative to one of those heroes, the Sage Archetype. It is clear that the Sage Archetype has been rising up throughout the COVID pandemic. 13 months ago, leaders of Saging International Leaders here at Ubiquity University and Humanity Rising, as well as leaders around the world, immediately came together to imagine ways to gain greater knowledge and understanding, to provide guidance as we stepped, all of us stepped onto new ground. Now in 2021, we continue keeping a high watch in discovering gems of wisdom embedded in this era of awakening. We discover new purposes, novel inventions, and life-affirming concepts, and ways of deepening even our connections around the world. Thankfully, even now, we have an opportunity to move through a portal to the next phase of this pandemic as vaccinations have become available to countries all around the globe. We have suffered great losses to varying degrees and we continue to balance these challenges precipitated by a moving target of harnessing this relentless virus and its variants, and discovering ways to live within the dense blanket of grief that has surrounded our planet Earth. Mysteriously, there are elements of wisdom and hope inherent in the outflowing aftermath. Although in the midst of many dreams that are now scattered and shattered really far and wide, the foundation of humanity has been shaken individually and collectively. Yet there continues to be evolving awareness, new insights, wisdom, and knowledge coming to light more so every single day. While we continue to seek stability, we are also imagining a future that soothes our souls and nourishes the well-being of our future generations and a flourishing planet. These realities all of them point to the presence of the Sage Archetype and the people around the world in vast numbers who are tapping into its transformational power. In a poignant ritual that was recently sent out to our Saging International community, there was a potent question that was posed. What gift within you is asking to be brought into the light at this time? What gift within you is asking to be brought into the light? Many of us may find that personally answering this question is complex, and perhaps others find it quite simple to answer. But in either case, it is an indisputable truth that our answers can be considered as emerging from the Sage Archetype as we search our hearts and we listen deeply to the wise inner voice and discover ways to lead forward. So as we search for deeper understanding of the world that we live in, let us remember how truly magnificent it is to be alive at this time. Can you imagine all of the highly unlikely things that had to happen in order for you to even have been born and to live at this time? It's difficult to imagine the strange, against all odds, things that had to happen to make your miracle of life occur. Imagine as a circle of attendees here this morning on the West Coast of US, that is, imagine that all the attendees here around the globe, that we collectively were born into this time. And imagine the possibility that you chose to be born and to live during a time when we speak the world's most common language. We walk around with small devices in our pockets and purses that can connect us to almost the entire history of the human knowledge. And we all are living through an unprecedented pandemic. Even though there are more than 7 billion people alive on the planet, it doesn't make our gift of life less unique. Profound to this gift of living right now in this era is that indeed we are also becoming more aware of the presence of the Sage Archetype. It is important to point out that some theorists say that there is nothing new about archetypes. Plato wrote about archetypes. Archetypes were, integral to the Jungian psychology. So why do we pay attention now? It is well to briefly at this moment to review a little bit about the groundwork of archetypes. Many here today it's quite likely that many are well versed regarding archetypes. And for others, this might be new territory. So considering Jung's definition, an archetype describes a primitive pattern of images inherited from our earliest human ancestors, present in the collective unconscious and available to the conscious mind. Archetypes have universal patterns of consciousness that have always been part of the human experience. So why would we consider a quote unquote emergence, if you will, of the Sage archetype this past year? Because of advances in conscious self-awareness, we are now becoming more aware of what Carolyn Myss names as the realm of archetypes. We have been called to a greater awareness during this past year, which includes becoming more conscious to the operating principles of archetypes during this expanding age of energy consciousness. Although theorists differ in the type of archetypes or the grand numbers, many write about 12 archetypes that help us discover ourselves more deeply. Within each archetype is a whole storehouse of information, and each archetype transfers power. In other words, it transfers influence. They influence our temperament, our nature, and talents. Each is a statement of qualities, all in just one word. Although archetypal potentials within each of us are universal, we express them differently, endowing them with different styles and traits and manners. And how we express them even actually is affected by age and our gender, the culture that we live in, and our own uniqueness. We are assisted through our life, the whole lifespan and life arc, by these inner guides or archetypes. They're like the innocent, the orphan, the warrior, the caregiver, the seeker, and the destroyer. There's the lover archetype, the creator, ruler, magician, the magician or fool, depending upon how it's labeled by what theorist, and the sage. Each of these, and likely an abundance of many others, live in us, and we live in them. So for our purpose today, a valid question actually is a very simple question, perhaps: what is the Sage archetype? However, the answer is a little more complex. The Sage archetype is constellating today in revelations of truth, deep self-reflection, holistic sensing, and intuitions of co-creative solutions that serve the well-being of the planet. The Sage archetype is also reflected in ways that people are actually expressing themselves as wise advisors, mentors, teachers, activists, and inspirers of hope. The Sage archetype helps us to see and understand what can be learned from a situation, What can be learned from a pandemic? This archetype is essential right now in helping us make sense, to wisely navigate, to cooperate, to gain stability, and to learn what it is that is critical for us as planetary citizens as we seek wisdom relative to the forces of this time. If we do not access the sage, we miss vital opportunities to potentially shift our perspective and in turn pivot to contribute to a better world in conscious and intentional ways. So how much or how little do you express the sage archetype in your life? Let's pause a moment to consider that question. How much or how little do you express the sage archetype in your life? You might want to just jot down on a piece of paper or a journal your initial thoughts so that you can go back to it. Witnessing what has been transpiring around the globe these past months, I truly believe that the sage archetype is making itself explicitly known, particularly at this time in human history. This is a time that all of the knowledge that we can acquire and the wisdom that we can muster is essential to continue addressing the crucial matters in our midst. It is imperative that we recognize that we are in a field of sage potentiality inherent in this era of awakening. So from your experience, has the sage archetype been more apparent in the past, or do you see it also becoming more apparent in the present? Do you imagine it becoming more apparent in the future? I invite you to share your thoughts in brief comments in the chat box. And while you are doing that, I'd like to share with you a story, a personal story, that applies to the relationship between the role of the sage and the sage archetype. So this gives a glimpse back into the past 15 years and how I believe the sage archetype has been at work in our cultural minds and hearts. I was discerning the focus of my dissertation topic during doctoral studies at Wisdom University, also known as Wisdom or Ubiquity University. And that was the time that my mother passed away. And I became the oldest woman in my family. And that happened in a moment. And then I asked the question, who and what am I now? The literal definition of matriarch certainly didn't fit my personal view, nor could I embrace the patriarch as its counterpart. I did not view myself as a senior or a crone. And so re-envisioning the aging paradigm became my avid pursuit in light of a seemingly negatively ingrained societal view of midlife to end of life. So in my research, there was little to readily discover 14, 15 years ago in libraries or even on the internet about the sage as defined or upheld in Western society. I remember going to the Berkeley University bookstore asking to be directed to resources relative to the sage and only being directed then to basically the plant kingdom and specifically bluish gray herbs. There wasn't much helpful cultural information outside of psychology. It was if the sage and perhaps the sage archetype were buried somewhere underground in the collective consciousness. Today, a definition is readily available. A profound, wise person, an experienced person, respected for sound knowledge and judgment, wise, judicial, prudent, one who provides sage advice. This definition transcends the limitations of matriarch or patriarch, donned the oldest woman or man in a family. It also is broader than elder, which defines a person by earlier birth or greater age. And it also upholds a relationship to behaviors and patterns of the sage archetype. While traditional societies have venerated the role of the sage throughout time, the Western culture has been slow to attend to the powerful benefits of the sage role and also to the sage archetype. For example, Chinese, Taoism, and Confucianism each view the sage as the primary keeper and transmitter of wisdom, culture, values, power, and spirituality. I would like to now invite Katya to a conversation here. Good morning, Katya.
Good morning, Marilyn.
Katya, Cyprus is your birth country.
Yes.
And how have you experienced the role of the sage in the Cypriot culture?
Well, as you said, I was born and raised on the island of Cyprus, and I was blessed enough to have my parents, my grandparents, and my great-grandparents teach me about life and about the power of intention, intuition, why community was so essential to our well-being. They taught me about compassion for myself, as well as compassion for others, and that love, more than anything, can guide us to transform ourselves in the world. So the sage archetype was so present in my life from the very beginning. I was encouraged to be a seeker for new knowledge, speak my truth with respect, and meet life challenges with grace. And most of all, appreciate the wisdom and experience of my elders. So I was blessed to be part of the daily small gatherings in our neighborhood. The women will gather around every afternoon. And that's where I had a chance through conversations to expand my worldview about humanity and learn about life through stories, by example, or by mentoring. I looked up to my elders as the wise ones, and I had no doubt that they would be there for them. They were the ones that I trusted to share my deepest thoughts, my emotions, and my experiences. And I felt energetically connected to them in such a big way because they made me feel accepted and to have the capacity to stay true and authentic to myself. So within my culture, I grew up with archetypes from the Greek mythology. And I treasure the thought that gods and goddesses and entities, and heroes were my mystical guides. And as I continued to grow and explore all facets of what it means to be human, they were right by my side. On the other side, I also had the spiritual part growing up Greek Orthodox, where we had all the saints. So my parents had to teach me that balance of all the different types of archetypes that affected my life. Now, one of the many lessons that I learned was that physical spaces absorb the energy and intention of all who pass through it, including our ancestors. So when we intentionally bless each space that we enter, we orchestrate an energy shift that affects not only our own experiences, but also the people who walk into the space with us or those who follow us. So I like to call those energy handprints. And depending on our intention of how we choose to show up, we can leave behind energy that inspires us to make a difference in the world, or we can also leave negative energy, which is not what we want. So today, although we enter this space virtually, I would love to invite everyone on this call to just take a few deep breaths and relax into this moment. Feel the energy of your body in your heart. And with each breath, let your intention bring forth a powerful message of love and light to the community. Allow yourselves to bring forth fresh and invigorating energy that supports the people who are sharing this space right now with you. And thirdly, show up fully, share your own wisdom, open up your minds and your hearts as we envision the new direction of our journey as sages at any age. So embracing the idea of sacred space, our energetic field of heartprints, brings us to revelations of truth, deep self-reflection, ability to forgive, and capacity to let go of what's not working for us anymore, what's not serving our humanity any longer. And those are all the lessons that I was able to learn and grow up with.
Thank you, Katya. So how do you think that we consciously move forward in our journey then with the knowledge of the past and attending to the present and then moving into the future?
Well, my maternal grandmother, she taught me that all human beings are energetically connected by an invisible lifeline that allows us to sense intuitively how we move from the past to the present and into the future. She also believed that we intuitively receive messages and signs daily. And some of us choose to pay attention to them and some of us don't. And I pay attention daily on that because that's what I was taught. So when we do pay attention to events, experiences, new learning, things that are surrounding us, the people who influence our lives, I think that we can navigate through life much more effectively and by making conscious choices. And in order for us to move from the past to the present, stay conscious and solid into the present so we can move into the future, I think we need to explore that question that there is not such a thing as accidents. They're only what I like to call intentional happenings. So the legacy that we create daily as sages can be one of continued growth and service to our world. And right now, I think we're at a new stage of evolution. In some sense, by choosing to be fully engaged and pay attention to our Sage archetype and what makes us feel alive, we'll gain a greater sense of meaning in our lives. When we learn from the past and appreciate the beauty of the present moment, we can build our capacity to look into the mystery and the possibilities of the future. So it's our opportunity to really embrace the wisdom of our experiences. And regardless of what challenges life is throwing at us, turn it around, look at what we can learn about it, and then we can share what's meaningful and transformative, not only within our own community, but with others around the world. So now I would like to ponder for a few moments and reflect on two essential questions that I think have to do with how we move through time. The first question is, why am I here right now? And Marilyn did a beautiful job sharing a little bit about this time that we're alive at this moment. Why am I here right now? What is my calling at this time? Let's pause for a few seconds and reflect on that. Our purpose at any stage of life, but especially as a sage, is at the root of our being, the very foundation of who we are and what we're meant to do. So where do you find your inner spark? What makes you get up in the morning? What do you look forward to every day? What brings you joy? What is your genius? And how do you use it to transform the world? More importantly, how do you use it to transform you? For me, taking my first breath every morning fills me with gratitude that I'm alive with a day ahead of me full of possibilities. I say that because I almost lost my life years ago. And yet here I am doing what I love most as part of my daily work.
Thank you, Katya. So as we shine a light on considerations for contributing to a better world in these desperate times, one way is by seeking knowledge and discerning truth, by drawing upon our core authentic strengths, and by truly valuing contributions we have the capacity to offer. If we intentionally live from our core strengths, I think we would agree then, right, that they lead to new doors and new places, answers, problem-solving skills, and wisdom. So can you imagine how powerful our collective influences then would be if we consciously viewed our strengths as potent resources that the Sage Archetype is calling us forward right now? So Katya, how would keenly being attuned to our authentic core strengths influence our expressions of the Sage Archetype?
Well, let me begin with the word potent. I love that word because it's so powerful. First, we need to recognize and appreciate our core strengths. We need to really pay attention what's in here. And that's part of the question that we just reflected on. Who am I, right now at this moment? And then we need to understand their power, that potent power that you were mentioning, as we begin to influence our expressions of Sage, of Sage Archetype. So let's take a look at some of those core strengths. The first one is our proficiency to stay open and curious in pursuit of knowledge. It doesn't matter how old we are, where we are in our journey, as long as we stay open and curious about everything, the world around us, especially things that are out of our comfort level, that's when we can move forward and get even stronger in terms of the way we choose to show up as a sage. Next, the next slide, please. Is the genius to live my purpose and meaning. This is not about somebody else's story. This is about you. This is about your sense of purpose and meaning. So how you choose to show up is totally up to you. Keep asking the question about what it is that you feel in your heart and live your life on purpose. That's one of the things that I like to share with people. Live your life on purpose. Next slide, please. Our propensity to choose how to respond positively. We all agree that there is no way that we can control what life is going to throw at us. And all the events of this past year and a half have shown us the challenges that we have been facing and continue to face. But that does not mean that we do not have a choice of how to respond. In responding positively rather than negatively, it builds our capacity and gives us the strength to create change in the way that serves us in the best possible way. Next slide. Our capability to speak my truth with grace and clarity. There's something to be told about speaking our truth. It's important to stop and think and taste and sense those words before they come out. And speaking our truth does not mean we hurt others in the process. Speaking our truth with grace and clarity is important because we want to make sure that we put ourselves out there so that we are part of the bigger collective. Next slide. Our ability to trust intuition as our guide. That's something that was taught to me and nurtured very early in my age, that I needed to trust my gut feeling. And how many times have we found ourselves second guessing a decision that we made, a place we wanted to go or not go, and then something happened and we said to ourselves, why didn't I trust my intuition? I knew better. Trust that gut feeling. Use it as your guide on a daily basis. Very important. The next strength is our skill to actively attend to what matters in this moment. Sometimes I think we spend so much time in the past or the present that we forget, in the past or the future, that we forget the essential part of what matters right here, right now. And we need to take deep breaths and actively attend to it so that we can move to the next step. Next slide, please. Our competency to integrate the power of intention. There's something so incredibly powerful about human beings that if we use our intention to put energetically what we want to see in the world, how we want to behave and show up in the world, we can be unstoppable. And collectively, if we use the power of intention, that's when change and transformation actually takes place. Next, our capacity to witness another. And here's a core strength that we all need to practice so much better. When it's time to have conversations, time to hear one another, time to come together to solve problems, it's not just about stepping all over each other and trying to show who has the best solution, who has the most to say. It's all about the capacity to truly witness each other in our beauty and in our wisdom, in our own spark and what we have to bring to the table and to the bigger whole. And finally, our adaptness to assimilate the authority of my story. This is one of my favorite things. Growing up on the Greek island, I learned through stories. And I learned that it was important to author my own story. So it's not about pointing a finger about everything that everybody does to change my story. I'm in charge of it. I want to make sure that I can choose the characters, the events, and the experiences that I want to bring into my story that allow me to grow as a human being, but more importantly, that allow me to give back to the community, to give back to the world in a most beautiful and powerful way. So be the author of your own story. So let's pause to take a few moments now to capture your initial thoughts about these beautiful core strengths of the Sage archetype. And feel free to continue to write in the chat or write in your own notes if you wish, as we move to the next question. Next slide, please. So how do you see your story unfolding as a sage, using your core strengths in transforming the world? How do you see your story unfolding as a sage, using your core strengths in transforming the world? And I know these questions are very deep and we give you very few seconds to have a chance to explore them. But our hope is that you can take this now with you at the end of this session, and you can explore them with like-minded people. You can explore them even with people with opposing worldviews from you, because that's where the richness comes from. My own story as a sage unfolded in creative ways during the pandemic. I'm somebody who is a social butterfly. I love to be with people. I love being surrounded by them. I love hugging. And it was pretty tough knowing that we had to be isolated. But here's how I found myself reaching deep into my core strengths. I felt like my heart and soul and spirit finally were catching up to my body, because I had the tendency to run all over the place and travel everywhere to meet the needs of my work. And so when we had to be in isolation, that's when I needed to redirect my energy. So I shifted my intention by going inward, staying grounded, and in the present moment, taking care of myself and expanding my capacity of being of service to others online. So regardless of the social isolation, I knew I needed to stay emotionally connected more than ever. So here are the core strengths that I use. My propensity to choose how to respond positively, regardless of all the challenges we were all facing. My ability to trust my intuition as my guide along the way. My skill to actively attend to what matters in this moment. And finally, the competency to integrate the power of my intention. So you see, our actions and choices on a personal level are part of our collective. We are part of the bigger whole. And the more we understand about those archetypes and embrace the idea that we can be guided by them, the more clearly I think we see ourselves and how to navigate through life.
Thank you, Katya. We could just have a conversation for much longer, for certain. And I would like to just close our time together by asking you this. What do you think about tapping more deeply into intergenerational participation and leading forward wisely? Could you give us a brief answer?
Yeah. I think it's only the power of the invitation, Marilyn. We cannot just simply say to young people, it's time to join us and we're going to tell you how to show up and what to do and what to say. They are leaders in their own right, and their voices are strong and they're showing up in the world in a beautiful way. And they already have their own archetypes that have shifted from the archetypes that we are used to. They are young and they are male and female, and they have incredible powers that match where the younger generations are right now. So how do we instill a sense of hope when we are in a place of despair at this moment? By creating hospitable space for deep listening and meaningful conversations where all worldviews and perspectives can shift and we can find our common ground, a place where we're witnessing each other's brilliance by tapping into the collective wisdom. That's how we can make that connection even more powerful and possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Katya. I so appreciate the conversation this morning, and I wish we had more time to go even deeper into the Sage Archetype from these perspectives of intergenerational participation. I would like to invite Randy now to join us. And so, Randy, how do you imagine the future of the Sage Archetype and how it might guide us in the process of global transformation? Could you speak to that for us this morning?
Sure. Well, thank you, Marilyn and Katya, for elucidating the scope and power of the Sage Archetype. To address the future of the Sage Archetype and its crucial role in the process of global transformation, we have to first address the mystery of the idea of the future. All we can say for certain is that the future has not yet happened. The rest of what we think of the future is a massive projection of our minds onto the blank canvas of the future. But clearly, each of us has all kinds of fantasies about what the future holds for us. So we can't really talk about the future without really talking about the imagination. Here, it might be useful if we use a simple definition of imagination as the presence of an absence. For example, if I ask you to imagine a polar bear, you can just conjure it up in your imagination. The polar bear is present in your mind's eye, but it's really absent. In the same way, the future has not yet happened, so it's absent, but through the power of the imagination, we can make it present. Of course, all kinds of wild fantasies are projected onto the future, as evidenced by the rich tradition of science fiction. But a genuine imagination of the future is usually guided by so-called trends that are extrapolations from our present situation. There are many futurist thinkers, most of them employed by corporations and the Defense Department, whose task it is to strategically imagine the future based on current trends. But there are not many futurists who think strategically about the future from a heart perspective. One of them is Dwayne Elgin. And in his recent book, Choosing Earth, Humanity's Great Transition to a Mature Planetary Civilization, he imagines several different ways of imagining the future. So Judy, we'll just go to the next slide there. So what is this future that Dwayne Elgin envisions? Let's just briefly look at a graph from Choosing Earth. And here we see three imaginations of the future in answer to the question, in what direction will the center of social gravity shift in the next half century? At the top, pathway 1, crash and collapse, is what might happen if we carry on with business as usual. Extrapolating from the present, the 2020s and 30s will be a period of social unraveling, followed by a crash of the social order, immense sorrow, and collapse. The small group of people who embody the Sage Archetype, the cultural creatives, are pictured in the small stream near the bottom left of the graph. In this imagination, they will be beaten down over the decades by the collective and overwhelmed by the ensuing chaos. This is a picture of what will happen if we do nothing. Pathway 2, authoritarian with artificial intelligence, is a future dominated by dictatorial governments employing artificial intelligence as a surveillance mechanism to control the population. As the inevitable unraveling, fall, and sorrow unfold, people trade their freedom for the security of staying alive in a highly controlled and regimented world. Destructive trends curl back on themselves and fall just short of human extinction. The result is a carefully watched, scrutinized, and controlled society that lives within ecological limits, but at the cost of many freedoms and a truncated or non-existent interior life. This is a picture of the future that's already taking place in authoritarian regimes such as China and Hungary. Pathway 3, Great Transition and Transformation, is an imagination of the future in which the attributes of the archetype of the sage are fully engaged. Unraveling, fall, and sorrow still happen because they're already baked into the cake, but they are met with the full capacities of the sage archetype. Able to sustain the immense sorrow of a world undergoing a transformative rite of passage, the sages in this scenario forge a pathway of regeneration and renewal as humanity chooses to live within the ecological boundaries of the earth and with conscious regard for the well-being of all life. Judy, you can take that slide down, thanks. So, pathway 3, the Great Transition, will still require a long stretch of healing and renewal for humanity to realize its potential. Sages living now and for the next few generations will not see the fruits of their labor. As the old Greek proverb goes, a society grows great when its elders plant trees whose shade they shall never sit in. Our imagination of the future deepens when we imagine more precisely who will be sitting under the trees planted by the sages of the present time. So let's use our imaginations to conjure up the future beings of the human and more than human worlds. As the great Gaian teacher Joanna Macy notes, those future beings have a moral claim on us. In an act of moral imagination, we can envision these future beings, the better to serve on their behalf. But here's the amazing thing. We can receive guidance from those same future beings. They have wisdom to offer us. It's a two-way street. It's literally a partnership of generations, including those not yet born. I first became aware of the partnership of generations and the continuity of human life while living in Hiroshima, Japan in the early 1980s. I was teaching at the Hiroshima International School and engaged in peace work at the World Friendship Center in Hiroshima. I'll never forget the sunny afternoon. I was reading Jonathan Schell's book, The Fate of the Earth, while sitting on the concrete steps of the Peace Pagoda on Mount Futabayama, overlooking the beautiful Ota River Delta and the gleaming city of Hiroshima. From that height, I could locate ground zero using the same natural features used by the bombardier in the Enola Gay on that fateful day, August 6, 1945. In the book I was reading, Schell was describing in great detail what the Earth will look like after nuclear war. There I was, imagining life after a nuclear conflict that would wipe out the human species, all while sitting in the shadow of a city where 120,000 people died at the hands of a relatively small nuclear device. Inspired by the soul of Hiroshima, I could feel the extinction of the human species happening. But then, as often happens when in an extreme emotional state, a flash of insight ensued. Nuclear war eliminates the human consciousness that gave it birth, nurtured it to fruition, and pushed the button. Extinction, like our personal death, is felt not when it has arrived, but before, as a deep shadow cast across the whole of life. It is we, the living, who experience extinction as it slowly saturates the deep recesses of our mind. In that moment, I felt viscerally the truth of Joanna's statement that the loss of a viable future is the pivotal psychological reality of our time. Depressing, sure, but then another insight emerged from my deep state of grief. The awareness of what changes when consciousness is no longer extant awakened me to the power of consciousness itself. Like a fish discovering that it's swimming in water, I realized that I was a carrier of consciousness, and that consciousness was a means by which creation looked upon itself. The threat of extinction had awakened me to the God spark within, to the deep meaning of the myth of consciousness. But the revelation didn't stop there. Another idea of Shell's, a logical extension of the threat of extinction, kept knocking at my door. He said that whether we have children or not, the possibility of humans extinguishing themselves makes us all parents of future generations. After Hiroshima and the advent of the nuclear age, humans must actively choose not to destroy themselves. To make the choice to live is an act that makes future generations possible. So that moment on Mount Futabayama was like an egg cracking open on my head. The idea that we're all parents of future generations and in an expansive partnership with those future beings has slowly worked itself into everything I think and do. Over the years, it has shed its anthropocentrism to include the future beings of all species on the earth. So let's exercise our imaginations, adapt and exercise in Joanna Macy's work that reconnects, and dialogue with future beings living 200 years in the future. Maybe they have something to say to you. Let's begin by making two assumptions. One is that there will be humans living on the earth 200 years from now. The other is that those future ones have a cultural memory of what is happening in our time in the early 21st century. They're not living in caves, but in some kind of life-sustaining communities. In order for those of us in the present to meet the future beings from 200 years in the future, we need to meet at a point outside of time. I would like to take you there, to meet such a person from the future. We travel to that place by the power of our intention and the power of our moral imaginations. So here's how we're going to do it. You might want to close your eyes or use a soft focus. I will make the sound ah, which will provide a sonic bridge to our common meeting ground outside of time. And we'll take it from there. So, and there, standing before you, is a human being from the 7th generation, 200 years in the future. Take the time to observe this person. The more detail, the better. I'll use my voice to articulate the questions that they're going to ask you. I invite you to listen to what they're saying. I'll give you 15 seconds of silence after each question to allow something other to emerge in your consciousness. Ancestor, I greet you. It's so amazing to see your face because all my life I've heard stories about teachers and grandparents about the time you're living. Some of the things I've heard I find hard to believe. So I'd like to check them out with you. They say that in your time, there are a few people richer than the richest ancient kings.
while billions of people are without enough food or shelter or clean water. They tell us that in your time, bombs are being made that can blow up whole cities. We know about that too. But they say you know about that. They tell us that whole species of animals and plants are going extinct. We know about that too, because gone is gone. But they tell us you know about that while it's happening. Is all this true? And if it is true, what's that like for you to live in such a time? Ancestor, I greet you. When we in our generation find water we can drink and soil that's safe to grow food, it's thanks to the work you and your friends are doing on our behalf. It must be hard for you, especially at the beginning, standing up for beings you haven't met and will never meet. So I want to ask you these questions. What inspired you to start on this path? And what were the first steps that you took? Ancestor, I greet you. We know you did not start with those first steps. There are celebrations about what you and your friends were doing to leave us a livable world. What they don't tell us, and what I would really like to know, is where did you find the strength to do this? Where do you find the power to keep on going for the sake of life, despite all the obstacles and discouragement? Can you tell me? Dear ancestors, I now want to bless you for making our lives possible. We know that you're alive at a pivotal point in the history of our planet. The way forward is difficult, but we know that a wisdom tradition emerged in your time that arose to the extremity of your situation. A great energy rose up from the earth herself, poured into human awareness through the instinctual archetype of wisdom, the sage, and manifested in immense acts of courage and compassion. Your sacrifices have not been forgotten. We sing songs about you. Epic poems are still being written. Our storytellers speak deep into the starry night about what happened in that great transition. Our only advice is to listen to the voice of the earth as it manifests in dreams, intuitions, synchronicities, and other spontaneities. She is the source of all wisdom, of all life. Do not forget that she's also the fountain of delight. We leave you now, but know that we are here available to you whenever you turn the face of your imagination in our direction. We thank you. We bless you. We encourage you. Stay strong. Remember, we want to live. With those words lingering on our ears, the imagination of the future beings begins to fade. Once again, through the power of our intention, our imagination, I will use the syllable awe to leave this space that is out of time and return to the present. Welcome back to our circle. Hope you're able to experience something new and insightful in that encounter with the magic of deep time. And so with those words of the future beings hanging in our minds and in our hearts, I return to the question that was asked by Marilyn in the beginning. How do you imagine the future of the Sage archetype And how might it guide us in the process of global transformation? And I'll just show you on a screen 5 big ideas that the future beings have been telling me that I hope you will inquire of them and ask, what are they telling you? First, the universe story. They're telling me it's the epic story of galactic evolution that will serve as the origin myth of all future forms of spirituality. Human development. They tell me that there's a new vision of human development emerging. It must be ecocentric, grounded in wholeness, activated through initiatory rites of passage, leading to a journey of soul initiation, which is everyone's birthright. It will include a transformed vision of aging as a conscious activation of the Sage Archetype. You will see elders as caretakers of the soul of the more than human community, the web of life. The beloved Earth community. Future beings tell me that a global culture of dignity and respect must be established, in which the legal and moral rights of the human and the more than human are balanced and achieved. Global community ritual. They tell me that new forms of global community ritual must be discovered and enacted. The emotional powers of celebration, empowerment, and grief must be kept flowing so that their healing power can assist the initiatory process of moving through the dark night of the species soul. And finally, they tell me that when considering your responsibilities to yourself and future generations, the most important question you can ask and answer is, how can I be a good future ancestor? Consider that the way you treat children in the present is a fractal to the way you treat the future beings. Once again, this is what the future beings are telling me, but the big question is, what might they be telling you? So Marilyn, that's how I think about the future of the Sage Archetype and how it might guide us in the process of global transformation. Turn it back to you to help us close our reflections.
Randy, thank you so much for expanding a vision for more deeply understanding expressions of the Sage Archetype around the world. And I now invite Katya to join us again as we move into summary of this potent topic. Katya?
Well, thank you, Randy. That was powerful. And with that, I would like, as part of our takeaway, as we close today, to really make a commitment to yourselves about you participating in really making sure that we take care of this world of ours, this planet of ours. Making a commitment to give yourself the gift of time as you reflect upon and take specific steps to acknowledge and validate how you see this sage emerging in your life. So in the next week, this is what we would like you to do. Name 3 times you have expressed the Sage Archetype. Identify 3 places in your personal life or in the world that are in desperate need of the Sage Archetype. And ask yourself, how can I participate to support that, to get better, stronger, more meaningful? Next. Then recognize the times you have seen something occur in the world that has emerged from the Sage Archetype. Jot it down. Acknowledge what you have noticed about the Sage Archetype and write about it. And more importantly, share it with someone else. Share it with others around you, because that's what's going to empower us to change the world. The next slide, please. Okay. And Judy, if you can put up the slide for me about Wake Up World. This is our time. That would be great, the globe. Not sure that she heard me. Let's see. No. Well, I will close with, oh, there we go. Thank you, Judy. I just feel that this slide went along with the incredible work that Randy just did. It is our time to wake up now to the knowledge that we inhabit one indivisible field of aliveness. It's our time to make a difference, to transform ourselves in the world. So remember the beauty of this journey every step of the way. Don't only pay attention to the end result, because the richness, the beauty that is in our hearts and in each other is happening along the way. So many blessings to you, and thank you for giving us this time and this space to share together as we continue to grow as sages at any age.
So at its best, the Sage archetype calls us forth into sacred and spiritual work. It invokes spirit to help us keep courageous with our minds and with our hearts open as we continue to envision personal, cultural, and planetary healing. It is from this sacred work that our passion fosters fruits and our contributions for the individuals whose lives we touch, the society that urgently needs our wisdom, intelligence, knowledge, insights, understanding, and cooperation, which are all central to the nature of seeking, which is at the heart of the Sage archetype. So I'd like to invite you to pause at this time for a moment and close your eyes and review images over the past year of passionate young leaders, courageous middle-aged leaders, to seasoned leaders around the world, scientists, first responders, doctors, neighbors, family members, all who have been exemplifying behaviors consistent with those of the Sage archetype. Imagine that they are relying on their core strengths in their search for knowledge and truth and upholding a better world. Imagine those you personally know acting in ways that drew them deeper into their relational, emotional, spiritual, and psychological capacities. Imagine all the considerations that are being given to the care of the people of the planet. Breathe in deeply an expansive breath of gratitude for their search for knowledge, the wisdom they have imparted, the guidance that they have provided, the service that they have given to our world. And may those you see in your mind's eye experience your gratitude energetically right now. As a participant today, we hope that you will embark on a heartfelt journey in becoming more aware of the Sage archetype within you and exploring its potential to lead the way to making positive and innovative contributions to family and community, and for healing that is so deeply needed at this time. May the Sage archetype influence your heartfelt service for the world and your vital contributions to maintaining a partnership of generations, so essential to the future destiny of humanity. May we learn to heed the urgent call to become more aware in this era of awakening, to speak for the Sage archetype, to protect it, to preserve it, to convey and express its wisdom function for future generations. We thank you for your consideration during this exploration of the emergence of the Sage archetype. And now circling around to my initial request for you to share your age, also known as years of life experience. Consider the fact that we collectively here today represent 6,168 years, 168 years of wisdom. Blessings to each of our attendees and to each person instrumental in Humanity Rising. May you never take for granted your profound presence in the world. And Randy, will you please prepare us by closing the heart field in which we all have been participating?
Yes, thank you, Marilyn, for that blessing. And you know, I remind myself many times that because I'm alive today, I have the opportunity to live one of the most meaningful lives ever lived by any previous generation of human being. It's exciting to be alive today. So as our time comes to a close, I invite you back into a receptive state of slow breathing, closing your eyes or making a soft gaze. Bring your awareness back to the center of the chamber of your spiritual heart. And there it is, the central point of your clear sphere. It's been there our entire time together, ever faithful, ever true. Now imagine a thin silver filament of great beauty that shoots out from the center of your heart and instantaneously goes to the outer edge of your sphere that has been suspended above the earth. And there we all are in each other's hearts, holding earth in our hearts, earth holding us in her heart. It's a great web of life. For the last 90 minutes, our collective deliberations have been spreading the healing balm of love across the face of our beautiful blue-green island home. Before we return, let's take a deep breath right now as a way of remembering this moment of togetherness in service to the destiny of Earth to become a planet of love, the home of a beloved Earth community all together. Now it's time to return. Using the power of your imagination, I invite you to slowly reduce the size of your sphere. Allow the edges to contract equally in all directions. Use your breath to slowly deflate this sphere. Notice the awareness at the edges of the sphere as it reverses its flow across the land, getting ever smaller. You may notice the moment when you disengage from another participant's sphere. Thank them for being in your heart space for this time. The edges of your sphere contracting across the oceans, lakes, and rivers, the mountains and deserts of the land in which you live, across the farmlands, towns, and cities near you. The edge is now around your neighborhood, your house or apartment, your room, your body. Hold it there for a moment. And as you hold your body in the domain of your spiritual heart, acknowledge your love for this body, that it has been given to you as a special gift from Mother Earth. Your body is your piece of the earth. Love it, bless it. Then allow the sphere to contract a bit more until it surrounds your physical heart. This amazing organ has the power to transform our future. Love it, bless it. Allow the edge of your clear sphere to contract until it's the size of a small BB inside the chamber of your spiritual heart. Then in a conscious act of will, lift that clear sphere from your heart up into the recesses of your brow spot. Look at it there. Feel your gratitude flow towards it. Then reach in with thumb and forefinger into your third eye and remove that clear sphere, holding it gently before you in your hand. In a simple gesture of gratitude, let it go. And as our eyes begin to open, our gaze begins to focus our meditation into just some of the mysteries and capacities of the spiritual heart is now complete. Jim, I pass it back to you for any closing remarks.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Katya. Judy, Marilyn, for a splendid session today. My goodness, Marilyn, 6,232, and that was just the people who indicated their age on the Zoom link. You can imagine the collective age if you included the 15, 20,000 people who were viewing us passively on Facebook or YouTube or one of the live partner channels. We represent tens of thousands of years of wisdom collectively. So that's just an amazing thought for all of us to take in, that we have far more wisdom than we can possibly even imagine, particularly if we would all come together as one heart, as Randy just illuminated as a possibility for us. So thank you so much for this. It's a wonderful thing, just personally, to see one of our alumni of the university flourish so beautifully and profoundly around the archetype of the sage and the process of aging. We're going to be exploring this whole domain much more comprehensively over the next several months because the populations of North America, Europe, Japan, and other countries around the world are aging, while populations in Latin America, Africa, and across Asia are getting younger. So there's this incredible bifurcation of the generations that's occurring on planet Earth at this moment. And what a beautiful image it would be to hold together a transgenerational commitment to wisdom, as some of us are getting older, some places are getting younger. If we all brought them together in one heart, the world would be immediately and irrevocably transformed. So that's a beautiful image that's been provided today, and I thank you all for it. Now, tomorrow, we're going to go in some ways to a very delicate and painful dimension of current reality, and that is the whole dimension of radiation and gender. One of the facts about radiation is that it has a much more damaging impact on women than it does on men, particularly women of childbearing age, and in particular, pregnant women. It adversely affects the unborn and the children more than adults. This is also true, by the way, of the vaccinations that are being rolled out. The data shows that women, more than men, are suffering the side effects and dying due to the vaccinations. And that's one reason why the AstraZeneca vaccine, as you probably all know, has been discontinued in a number of countries in Europe. So women are just more vulnerable to the effects of damaging radiation and damaging chemicals in the body. And tomorrow we're going to look at that because it's a very important issue for us to consider. That's on Humanity Rising. And we need to take all this information, whether it's about George Floyd and racism around the world, or the impact of radiation on our bodies, particularly women's bodies, in the spirit of the sage. There's no archetype in the world right now that's more profoundly important than the archetype of one who can see the part from the perspective of the whole and honor all the other different parts in equal measure as fractals of the whole. So thank you, panel, for this splendid illumination today on the sage. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again tomorrow here on Humanity Rising. And now for those of you who would be interested, you can continue this dialogue in our after session chat group. And then I put in the chat box a link to a course that one of the wisest scientists of our time, Rupert Sheldrake, a true sage, is going to be having tomorrow here at Ubiquity University, a live workshop with Rupert on the future of science. Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Bye for now.
Bye.